The blood on her lip had dried, but Thornton McKenzie still found himself staring at it, transfixed by the dark crimson stain as the stagecoach rattled towards Silver Creek, Wyoming Territory, in the spring of 1878. The woman sat across from him, clutching a small carpetbag as if it contained her entire world, which, he supposed, it likely did. Thornton hadn't planned to be on this particular stagecoach. His business in Cheyenne had concluded early, and he'd caught the first coach heading back to Silver Creek rather than wait another day. Now, he found himself unable to look away from the young woman whose face told a story without her speaking a single word. The bruises blossomed like violets across her cheekbone and disappeared beneath the brim of her modest bonnet. Her eyes remained downcast, studying the frayed edges of her traveling dress. The other passengers, a traveling salesman and an elderly couple, pretended not to notice, but Thornton couldn't grant her the same courtesy. Something about her called to him. Silver Creek, 10 minutes, the driver shouted as they approached the town. The woman's head jerked up, her eyes a startling shade of gray-blue widening with what Thornton recognized as fear. She glanced out the window at the collection of wooden buildings that constituted Silver Creek, then back at her hands, which trembled slightly in her lap. When the stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the Silver Creek Hotel, the other passengers quickly disembarked. Thornton moved to follow them, but paused when he noticed the woman hadn't moved. She sat frozen, staring out the window at a man pacing on the boardwalk, a heavy-set fellow with an expensive suit and a gold watch chain stretching across his substantial belly. "Miss, this is Silver Creek," Thornton said gently. Her eyes flashed to his, and he saw pure terror there. Is that Mr. Oscar Blackwood?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sounds of the bustling street. Thornton glanced at the man. "Yes, that's Blackwood, owns the saloon and a few other businesses in town," he frowned. "Do you know him?" She clutched her bag tighter, her knuckles white. "I'm supposed to be meeting him. He's the man I'm to marry." The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Oscar Blackwood had been boasting for weeks about his mail-order bride arriving from Boston, a refined Eastern lady who would bring class to his establishment. The town had been scandalized, but not surprised. Blackwood was known for acquiring what he wanted, regardless of whether it wanted to be acquired. "Are you Miss Tessa Reynolds?" Thornton asked, recalling the name Blackwood had mentioned in the saloon one night. She nodded stiffly, then winced as the movement seemed to cause her pain. When she looked up at him again, Thornton saw a depth of desperation he'd never encountered before. "Please," she whispered. It was just one word, but it contained a universe of meaning. Thornton looked back at Blackwood, who hadn't yet spotted them in the coach. He knew the man's reputation, his treatment of the saloon girls, the bruises that appeared on his housekeeper's arms, the way he'd broken a cowboy's fingers over a disputed card game. Without thinking further, Thornton made a decision that would change his life forever. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, then placed her gloved hand in his. As Thornton helped her from the stagecoach on the side away from the hotel, he kept his body between her and Blackwood's line of sight. They slipped around the back of the stage station and down the alley between the mercantile and the blacksmith shop. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town," Thornton explained quietly as they hurried along. "I have a horse at the livery. We can be gone before Blackwood realizes you've arrived. He'll look for me," she said, her voice steadier now that they were moving away from the hotel. "He paid for my passage. There are papers." "I know Oscar Blackwood," Thornton said grimly. "And I know those bruises weren't acquired on your journey west." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Miss Reynolds, I'm offering you sanctuary, not making demands. If you wish to meet your intended, I won't stop you. But if you're asking for help, I'm willing to provide it." She searched his face, looking for something deception, perhaps, or ulterior motives. Thornton met her gaze steadily. He was 32 years old, had fought in the war, built his ranch from nothing, and never once considered himself a knight in shining armor. Yet here he was, ready to challenge one of the most powerful men in Silver Creek for a woman he'd met 10 minutes ago. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You don't know me." "I know enough," he answered simply. "No woman deserves what he'll do to you," she swallowed hard. "He sent money." "I signed a contract." Her voice caught. "My father arranged it all before he died. I had nowhere else to go." "Contracts can be broken," Thornton said, "and money can be repaid." A shout from the direction of the stage station interrupted them. Blackwood had discovered his bride was missing. Without another word, Tessa gripped Thornton's arm. "I'll come with you," she said. They moved quickly to the livery stable, where Thornton's gelding, a sturdy buckskin named Buck, was stabled. The stableman, Jimmy, raised his eyebrows at the sight of Tessa, but asked no questions when Thornton pressed a silver dollar into his palm with a murmured, "You haven't seen us." Within minutes, they were riding out of town, Tessa seated behind Thornton, her arms wrapped around his waist and her carpetbag tied to the saddle. As they put distance between themselves and Silver Creek, Thornton felt her gradually relax against his back. "I'm Thornton McKenzie," he said over his shoulder. "Most folks call me Thorn." "Tessa Reynolds," she replied, her voice carried away by the wind, "though I suppose I'm not sure who I am anymore." Thornton urged Buck into a canter as they headed toward the rolling hills where his ranch lay. "Well, Miss Reynolds, I reckon you have some time to figure that out." As they crested a hill, Thornton's ranch came into view, a modest but well-maintained two-story house. A large barn, corrals, and outbuildings spread across a valley with a creek running through it. A herd of cattle grazed on the western pastures, and smoke rose from the chimney of the bunkhouse where his 3 ranch hands lived. "Welcome to the Double M," Thornton said as they approached. "It's not much, but it's peaceful." Tessa's arms tightened around his waist. "It looks beautiful," she said, and he could hear the genuine wonder in her voice. Thornton's foreman, Cal Johnson, emerged from the barn as they rode into the yard. His weathered face registered surprise at the sight of Tessa, but he only touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Didn't expect you back till tomorrow, boss," Cal said, taking Buck's reins as Thornton dismounted. "Change of plans," Thornton replied, helping Tessa down from the horse. "Cal, this is Miss Reynolds. She'll be staying with us for a while." Cal's eyes flickered to the bruises on Tessa's face, then back to Thornton. Understanding passed between the men. "Pleased to meet you, madam," he said, nodding politely. "Mrs. Flores is inside. She'll get you settled." As Cal led Buck away, Thornton retrieved Tessa's carpetbag and gestured toward the house. "Mrs. Flores is my housekeeper. She lives in town but stays here most days. She's a good woman, doesn't talk much, but she's kind." Tessa nodded, tugging her bonnet lower to shade her face. "Mr. Mackenzie, I don't know how to thank you, but I have to ask what happens when Mr. Blackwood comes looking for me. He won't simply let me go." Thornton's jaw tightened. "Let me worry about Blackwood. For now, you need rest and tending to those bruises. Inside the house, Mrs. Flores, a stout Mexican woman in her 50s, took one look at Tessa and immediately began fussing over her in a mixture of English and Spanish. Thornton explained that Tessa would be staying as their guest, and Mrs. Flores, who had worked for him for 7 years and knew better than to question him, simply nodded and led Tessa upstairs to the spare bedroom. When they were gone, Thornton poured himself a small whiskey and stood by the window, watching the ranch hands move about their evening chores. He'd acted on instinct today, but now the reality of what he'd done began to sink in. Oscar Blackwood was not a man who took kindly to being crossed, and Thornton had just stolen his mail-order bride. There would be consequences. Yet as he recalled the fear in Tessa's eyes and the whispered pleas that had pierced straight through to his soul, Thornton knew he wouldn't have done anything differently. Whatever came next, he would face it. Upstairs, Mrs. Flores helped Tessa remove her traveling clothes and bathe. The older woman's gentle hands applied salve to the bruises on Tessa's ribs and back injuries she'd acquired before even meeting Oscar Blackwood. Her father's business partner, Mr. Hayward, had been quick to assert his control over her after her father's death. When he'd arranged the marriage to his Western associate, Tessa had been desperate enough to agree, hoping that life with a stranger couldn't be worse than life under Hayward's care. How wrong she had been. Her first meeting with Blackwood, when he'd come to Boston to finalize the arrangements, had shown her exactly what kind of man he was. One night in his company had left her with bruises that were only now beginning to fade, and the terrifying promise of what her life would become once she was his wife. "You rest now," Mrs. Flores said, tucking a quilt around Tessa as she lay in the clean, simple bed. "Senor McKenzie, he is good man. You safe here." Tessa wanted to believe her. As exhaustion overcame her fear, she drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in months, downstairs. Thornton sat at his desk, drafting a letter to the territorial judge he'd befriended during the war. He needed legal advice, and quickly. He suspected that technically he had abducted Tessa, even if it was at her request. And while mail-order bride contracts weren't legally binding marriages, there would be financial agreements that Blackwood would use to his advantage. A knock at the door interrupted his writing. Cal entered, his expression grave. "Riders coming," he said simply. Blackwood and 3 men with him. Thornton nodded, unsurprised. "Get the boys inside. No one starts anything, but be ready." As Cal left to gather the ranch hands, Thornton checked his revolver and tucked it into his belt at the small of his back, hidden by his jacket. He stepped onto the porch just as 4 riders entered the yard. Oscar Blackwood led the group, his expensive suit now covered with dust from the ride. His face was flushed with anger beneath his derby hat. Behind him rode his bartender and 2 men Thornton recognized as the hired muscle Blackwood employed to handle problems at his saloon. "McKenzie," Blackwood called, reining his horse to a stop. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Thornton remained on the porch, his posture relaxed but alert. "I don't recall taking anything of yours, Blackwood. Don't play dumb with me," Blackwood snarled. "My bride was on that stagecoach. Jimmy at the livery says he saw you riding out with a woman. Where is she?" "Any woman traveling with me is under my protection," Thornton replied evenly. "I suggest you head back to town. It'll be dark soon." Blackwood dismounted, his substantial bulk landing heavily on the ground. "I paid good money for that girl. $500 to her guardian in Boston, plus the cost of her passage west. She's mine by contract, and I want her now." Behind Thornton, the door opened, and Cal and the other 2 ranch hands stepped out, each carrying a rifle held casually but ready. Blackwood's men shifted nervously in their saddles. "Seems to me," Thornton said, "that any contract signed under duress might not hold up in court. Those bruises on her face tell a different story than the one you're selling, Blackwood." "What happens between a man and his wife is his business," Blackwood snapped. "She's not your wife," Thornton countered, "and she never will be if she doesn't want to be." Blackwood's face darkened. "You're making a powerful enemy, McKenzie." "I've got friends in Cheyenne who could make life very difficult for a small rancher like you. And I've got friends who remember how you dodged service during the war while selling shoddy supplies to the Union Army at inflated prices," Thornton replied coolly. "I'm sure the territorial marshal would be interested in revisiting some of those contracts." The 2 men stared at each other, the tension stretching between them like a drawn bowstring. Finally, Blackwood spat on the ground. "This isn't over," he warned. "That girl is coming with me one way or another." "Not today she isn't," Thornton said, "and I'd think carefully before coming back. My men don't take kindly to trespassers." With a final glare, Blackwood remounted his horse. "You'll regret this, McKenzie. No woman is worth crossing me." As the 4 riders turned and rode away, Thornton watched until they disappeared over the hill. Only then did he let his shoulders relax slightly. "He'll be back," Cal said quietly, coming to stand beside him. "I know," Thornton agreed. "Post a watch tonight." "I don't think he'll try anything so soon, but I won't take chances." Later that evening, after a simple supper that Tessa was too nervous to eat much of, Thornton explained what had happened with Blackwood. They sat in the parlor, the lamp casting soft shadows across the comfortable but modestly furnished room. "He'll try to use the law against us," Thornton explained. "I've sent a letter to Judge Hammond in Cheyenne, but until we hear back, we need to be cautious." Tessa twisted her hands in her lap. "I can't stay here and put you in danger. Perhaps if I moved on, went further west." "And go where, with what money?" Thornton asked gently. "Blackwood has connections throughout the territory. You'd be alone and vulnerable." "I've put you in an impossible position," she said, her voice breaking. "You don't even know me, and now you're risking everything." Thornton leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. In the lamplight, his features were strong, a straight nose, determined jaw softened slightly by the neatly trimmed beard he wore, and eyes the color of aged whiskey. He was not a handsome man in the conventional sense, but his face held character and kindness. "Miss Reynolds, Tessa, I made my choice when I offered to help you," he said. "I don't regret it. Blackwood is a danger to this community that folks have ignored for too long. Maybe it's time someone stood up to him." "But why you?" she asked. "Why would you put yourself at risk for a stranger?" Thornton was quiet for a moment, considering her question. "I was married once," he finally said. "Her name was Sarah. She died in childbirth 5 years ago along with our son." His voice was steady, but Tessa could hear the old pain beneath his words. "Before that, I was in the war. I saw too many people suffer because others looked away. I promised myself I wouldn't be the kind of man who turns his back when someone needs help." Tessa felt tears welling in her eyes. "I'm sorry about your wife and child." "Thank you," he said simply. "Now you should get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out our next steps." That night, as Tessa lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the sounds of the Wyoming night, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months' hope. Thornton McKenzie was a stranger to her, yet she felt safer in his home than she had anywhere since her father died. Whether that safety would last remained to be seen, but for now, she would allow herself to believe it might. In the following days, Tessa began to find her place at the Double M. Mrs. Flores taught her the rhythms of ranch life, which were far different from her upbringing in Boston. Though her hands were soft and unused to labor, Tessa insisted on helping with household tasks. The work gave her purpose and distracted her from the constant worry about Blackwood's next move. Thornton, for his part, maintained a respectful distance. He was unfailingly polite but careful not to crowd her or make her uncomfortable. In the evenings, they would sometimes sit in the parlor, Thornton reading from his modest library while Tessa mended clothing or worked on a quilt misses. Flores had started. A week after her arrival, Thornton received a reply from Judge Hammond. He found Tessa in the kitchen garden, where she was helping Mrs. Flores harvest early summer vegetables. "The judge says your contract with Blackwood isn't legally binding as a marriage," he explained, holding the letter. "However, there is the matter of the money Blackwood paid to your guardian. Legally, he could sue for its return." Tessa wiped her hands on her apron. "I have $28 saved from selling my mother's jewelry before I left Boston. It's not much, but it's all I have." Thornton shook his head. "Keep your money. I've been saving to buy the Wilkins property that borders my land to the north. I can use some of that to settle with Blackwood if necessary." "I can't let you do that," Tessa protested. "You've already done too much." "It's an investment," Thornton said with a small smile. "The judge also suggested that having employment would strengthen your position if this goes to court. It would show you're not dependent on Blackwood or the contract." Tessa considered this. "What kind of employment could I find here?" "Well, Silver Creek needs a schoolteacher," Thornton replied. "The last one left 3 months ago to get married. The town council has been looking for a replacement." "I was trained as a teacher," Tessa said, surprised. "I taught at a girls' school in Boston for a year before my father fell ill." "Then it's settled," Thornton said. "I'll speak to Reverend Collins. He heads the school committee." 2 days later, Thornton took Tessa into town, both of them tense with the knowledge that they might encounter Blackwood. They rode in Thornton's wagon rather than on horseback, with Cal following on his horse as an extra precaution. Tessa wore her best dress, a modest blue cotton that Mrs. Flores had altered to fit her better, and a bonnet that shaded her face, where the bruises had faded to faint yellowish marks. Silver Creek looked different in daylight than it had on the evening of her arrival. The main street was busy with wagons and riders, the shops open for business. Thornton helped her down from the wagon in front of the small white church that also served as the schoolhouse. "Reverend Collins is expecting us," he said, offering his arm. As they walked toward the church, Tessa felt eyes on them. Women paused in their shopping to watch, and men on the boardwalk exchanged glances. Word had clearly spread about the mail-order bride who had fled from Oscar Blackwood to stay with Thornton McKenzie. The Reverend, a thin man with kind eyes, welcomed them warmly. After a brief interview during which Tessa described her education and teaching experience, he offered her the position. "We can't pay much," he explained apologetically. $20 a month plus room and board at Mrs. Wilson's boarding house for single ladies." "That's very generous," Tessa said, though the thought of leaving the safety of Thornton's ranch made her stomach tighten with anxiety. "There's no need for Miss Reynolds to move to town just yet," Thornton interjected. "The ride from my ranch isn't long, and she's welcome to stay until she's settled in her new position." The Reverend's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "Of course. The school term starts in 3 weeks. That should give you time to prepare." As they left the church, Tessa felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. A teaching position would give her independence and purpose, but it would also place her in town, where Blackwood could easily find her. "Thank you," she said to Thornton as they walked back toward the wagon. "For everything," he nodded, his eyes scanning the street with casual vigilance. "You earned the position on your own merits. I just made the introduction." They were nearly to the wagon when the batwing doors of the Silver Spur Saloon swung open and Oscar Blackwood emerged, followed by several men. He spotted them immediately, his face darkening with anger. "There she is," he called loudly, causing heads to turn up and down the street. "The woman who broke her contract and stole my money." Thornton stepped slightly in front of Tessa, his posture relaxed but ready. "Go back inside, Blackwood. You're making a fool of yourself." Blackwood advanced down the boardwalk, stopping a few feet away from them. He was dressed in a flashy suit with a brocade vest that strained over his belly, a gold watch chain glinting in the sunlight. "Everyone in this town knows what you did, Mackenzie," he said, his voice carrying. "Stole another man's bride right off the stagecoach. Is that the kind of man you are?" "A thief." Tessa felt her face burning with humiliation as townspeople gathered to watch the confrontation. Cal had moved closer, his hand resting near his holstered revolver. "Miss Reynolds came with me of her own free will," Thornton replied evenly. "And we both know why she didn't want to meet you, don't we, Blackwood? Those bruises told quite a story." A murmur ran through the gathering crowd. Blackwood's face flushed darker. "What happens between a man and his woman is private business," he snarled. "She's not your woman," Thornton said, his voice hardening. "She never was, and she never will be." Blackwood's hand moved toward the pocket of his coat. In an instant, Cal had drawn his revolver, though he kept it pointed at the ground. "I wouldn't," Cal warned quietly. A tense silence fell over the street. Then Sheriff Williams pushed through the crowd, his badge catching the sunlight. "That's enough," the sheriff said firmly. "Take your disagreements elsewhere. You're disrupting the peace." Blackwood glared at Thornton. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Thornton replied. "Judge Hammond has already ruled that Miss Reynolds' contract isn't binding. She's free to make her own choices." The sheriff looked between them. "Is that true?" The judge ruled. Thornton nodded. "I have his letter." "Miss Reynolds has accepted a position as the town's new schoolteacher. She'll be starting when the term begins." This announcement caused another ripple of whispers among the onlookers. The sheriff scratched his chin thoughtfully. "Well then, seems to me the matter's settled, Blackwood. The town needs a teacher more than you need a wife." Blackwood's face contorted with rage. "I paid $500 for her. Someone's going to reimburse me. I'll settle your expenses, Thornton said coldly. Come by my ranch tomorrow with the receipts for what you actually paid, not what you claim you paid. We'll conclude our business then. Without waiting for a response, Thornton guided Tessa to the wagon and helped her up. Cal mounted his horse, keeping his eye on Blackwood as Thornton climbed up beside Tessa and took the reins. As they drove away, Tessa finally released the breath she'd been holding. I'm sorry you had to confront him like that. Don't apologize, Thornton said. It needed to happen sooner or later. He glanced at her. Are you sure you want to take the teaching position? It will mean being in town regularly. Tessa straightened her shoulders. I can't hide forever. I need to build my own life, and teaching is something I love and know how to do well. Thornton nodded, a hint of admiration in his eyes. Then we'll make it work. The next day, Blackwood arrived at the Double M flanked by his lawyer, a nervous man named Perkins who practiced in Silver Creek. Thornton met them in the yard, Cal and the other ranch hands nearby, ostensibly working but keeping a close watch. The negotiation was brief and tense. Blackwood produced receipts totaling $375, substantially less than the $500 he had claimed publicly. Thornton counted out the money, added $25 for inconvenience, and had Perkins draw up a document stating that all obligations between Blackwood and Tessa Reynolds were null and void. Sign it, Thornton said, pushing the paper toward Blackwood. The saloon owner's hand shook with suppressed rage as he scrawled his signature. You've made an enemy today, McKenzie. I've had worse, Thornton replied calmly. After Blackwood and his lawyer left, Thornton brought the document to Tessa, who had waited inside the house. It's done, he said, handing her the paper. Legally, you're free of him. He can't claim any right to you or your future earnings. Tessa stared at the document, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. There's nothing to repay, Thornton said. Just build the life you want. That's enough. As the weeks passed, Tessa prepared for her teaching position while continuing to help around the ranch. She and Thornton developed a comfortable routine, sharing meals and quiet evenings. Sometimes they would sit on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in brilliant colors, while Thornton told her stories of his years building the ranch. She learned that he had come west after the war with nothing but his horse and the skills he'd acquired as a cavalry officer. The Double M named for McKenzie and his late wife's maiden name, Morrison had started as a small homestead claim and grown through years of hard work and careful management. Now, it was one of the more successful operations in the county, though nowhere near as large as some of the cattle baron spreads. In turn, Tessa shared stories of her life in Boston, her father's modest success as a merchant, her mother's death when Tessa was 12, and her own education at a progressive school for young women. She spoke little of the dark months after her father's death, when Henry Hayward had taken control of her life, but Thornton seemed to understand the shadows those memories cast. The evening before Tessa was to begin teaching, they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Summer was fading into autumn, the evenings growing cooler. Mrs. Wilson has prepared a room for me, Tessa said, breaking a comfortable silence. I should move to the boarding house tomorrow after school. Thornton nodded, though she thought she detected a flicker of something disappointment, perhaps cross his face. It makes sense. You'll be closer to the school. Yes, she agreed, though the thought of leaving the ranch filled her with an unexpected sadness. I've imposed on your hospitality for too long already. It's been no imposition, Thornton said quietly. Having you here has been pleasant. The simplicity of the statement touched her deeply. It has been pleasant for me as well, she replied softly. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken feelings that neither was ready to acknowledge. I'll still see you, Thornton said finally. I come into town for supplies every week, and you're always welcome here on weekends if you'd like a respite from town life. I'd like that very much, Tessa said, smiling at him in the fading light. The next morning, Thornton drove Tessa to town in the wagon, her few belongings packed in her carpetbag and a trunk he had given her. The school bell rang clear and bright as they approached the white clapboard building where 15 students waited for their new teacher. Thornton helped her down from the wagon. "You'll do wonderfully," he said, his confidence in her evident. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly nervous about facing a classroom again after so long. "For everything," he nodded, tipping his hat. "Good luck, Miss Reynolds." As Tessa walked toward the schoolhouse, the children watching her curiously from the doorway, she felt a strange mixture of excitement and loss. She was beginning a new chapter of her life, one she had chosen for herself, yet leaving behind the sanctuary that had made it possible. Tessa's first day as Silver Creek schoolteacher was challenging but rewarding. Her students ranged from 6 to 16 years old, with varying levels of education. Some of the older boys tested her authority, but by the end of the day, she had established firm but fair rules that earned their grudging respect. After school, Mrs. Wilson, a widow in her 60s who ran the boarding house with military precision, showed Tessa to her room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a desk, and a washstand. The window overlooked the church garden, providing a pleasant view. "Supper's at 6 sharp," Mrs. Wilson informed her. "No gentlemen callers in the rooms, though you may receive visitors in the parlor until 8 o'clock. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson," Tessa said politely. "That all sounds very reasonable." When the older woman left, Tessa sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the changes in her life. 2 months ago, she had been traveling west to marry a man who had already shown her his cruel nature. Now she was a schoolteacher with her own income, free to make her own decisions. The transformation seemed almost miraculous. Yet as she unpacked her few belongings, she found herself thinking of the double M and its owner. Thornton McKenzie had become important to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. His quiet strength, his unwavering support, and the gentle consideration he showed her had awakened feelings she'd never experienced before. Was it merely gratitude, she wondered, or something deeper? Life quickly fell into a rhythm. Weekdays were filled with teaching, lesson planning, and the quiet routine of the boarding house. On Saturdays, Tessa often went to the mercantile to purchase small items for her room or classroom, and she attended church on Sundays with the other boarding house residents. She saw Thornton occasionally when he came to town for supplies. He would tip his hat to her on the street, sometimes stopping for a brief conversation if she wasn't surrounded by students or other townspeople. These encounters, though brief, became the highlights of her weeks. Oscar Blackwood remained a threatening presence. He would watch her from the boardwalk when she walked to and from school, his gaze cold and calculating. Though he never approached her directly, his silent observation was a constant reminder that he had not forgotten or forgiven what he perceived as a humiliation. 3 weeks after Tessa began teaching, Thornton invited her to Sunday dinner at the ranch. Mrs. Wilson, after ascertaining that Mrs. Flores would be present as a chaperone, gave her permission to accept. The wagon ride to the Double M felt like a homecoming. As the familiar buildings came into view, Tessa felt a sense of peace settle over her. Mrs. Flores welcomed her with a warm embrace, and even Cal and the other ranch hands seemed pleased to see her. After dinner, Thornton suggested a walk along the creek. The autumn afternoon was mild, the cottonwoods along the water turning golden in the late September sunlight. "How are you finding life as Silver Creek schoolteacher?" Thornton asked as they strolled along the bank. "I enjoy it more than I expected," Tessa admitted. "The children are eager to learn, for the most part, and the parents have been supportive. Even the town council approved my request for new readers and arithmetic books." "The town is lucky to have you," Thornton said. "The previous teacher barely taught more than basic reading and ciphering." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the gurgling of the creek and the occasional call of a meadowlark. "Do you feel safe in town?" Thornton asked eventually, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. Tessa considered the question. Mostly. Blackwood watches me sometimes, but he hasn't approached me. Mrs. Wilson is very protective of her boarders, and Sheriff Williams has been kind enough to walk by the school regularly. Thornton nodded, though she could see tension in the set of his shoulders. If you ever feel uncomfortable, send word to me. I can be in town within an hour. Thank you, she said, touched by his concern, but I can't live in fear forever. I need to build my own life. I understand, he replied, his voice softening. Independence suits you. You've changed since you arrived. Have I? She asked, curious about how he saw her. You stand taller, he said simply. Your voice is stronger. You look people in the eye now. Tessa hadn't realized how much she had changed, but Thornton was right. The frightened woman who had whispered please on the stagecoach was fading, replaced by someone who was learning to trust her own judgment and strength. It's because of you, she said softly. You gave me the chance to find myself again. Thornton stopped walking and turned to face her. In the golden afternoon light, his features were illuminated with unusual clarity, the small scar near his right eyebrow, the laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, the strand of silver beginning to appear in his light brown hair. You did the hard work yourself, he said. I just provided a safe place for you to do it. Their eyes met, and Tessa felt something shift between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily since that first day on the stagecoach. Thornton took a half-step closer, then hesitated, as if uncertain whether his attention would be welcome. Tessa found herself holding her breath, wanting him to continue the movement but unsure how to encourage it. The moment stretched between them, filled with possibility. Then the sound of hoofbeats approaching broke the spell. Thornton stepped back, his expression closing as Cal rode up to them. Sorry to interrupt, boss, Cal said, his eyes flicking briefly to Tessa. But Barton's here from town, says there's trouble. Thornton's posture changed instantly, becoming alert and focused. What kind of trouble? Blackwood's been talking all over town, Cal explained. Says he's got proof Miss Reynolds stole money from him before she left Boston, claims she took jewelry that belonged to his family. Tessa gasped. That's a lie. I never stole anything in my life. Of course it's a lie, Thornton agreed grimly. But it's a dangerous one. Theft is a serious accusation. He's telling everyone who'll listen, Cal continued. Got the sheriff looking mighty uncomfortable. Barton thought you should know right away. Thornton nodded. Thank you, Cal. Tell Barton I appreciate the warning. He turned to Tessa. I should get you back to town. We need to address this directly before the rumors spread further. The peaceful mood of the afternoon shattered. They returned to the ranch house in tense silence. Mrs. Flores, sensing something was wrong, quickly packed a basket of food for Tessa to take back to the boarding house. As Thornton helped her into the wagon, Tessa felt fear creeping back. Why is he doing this? He has his money back. Why can't he leave me in peace? Men like Blackwood don't accept defeat, Thornton said, his voice hard. This isn't about money anymore, it's about pride and control. The ride to town was much quicker than the leisurely journey out had been. As they approached Silver Creek, Tessa could see unusual activity on the main street, groups of people talking animatedly, heads turning to watch as Thornton's wagon passed. Thornton drove directly to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Williams was standing on the boardwalk outside, looking harried. His expression grew even more uncomfortable when he saw Thornton and Tessa. "Mackenzie," he greeted them with a nod. "Miss Reynolds, I expect you've heard about Blackwood's accusations." "We have," Thornton replied, helping Tessa down from the wagon, "and they're complete fabrications." "Miss Reynolds is no thief," the sheriff sighed, removing his hat to run a hand through his thinning hair. "I figured as much, but Blackwood's making a lot of noise and he's got a telegram from Boston that he claims backs up his story." "A telegram from whom?" Tessa asked, her heart racing. "My father's partner, Mr. Hayward. That's the name," the sheriff confirmed. "Says you took family jewelry worth over $1,000 before leaving Boston." "The only jewelry I took was my mother's," Tessa said firmly, "and it was left to me in her will. I sold most of it to pay for necessities after my father died." The sheriff studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe you, Miss Reynolds, but this puts me in a difficult position. Blackwood's demanding I investigate the allegations, and he's got the mayor backing him." "Mayor Jenkins is in Blackwood's pocket," Thornton said dismissively. "Everyone knows that." "Maybe so, but he's still the mayor," the sheriff replied. "Look, I don't want to cause trouble for you, Miss Reynolds. You're doing a fine job with the school, but this needs to be resolved properly." "What do you suggest?" Thornton asked, his tone indicating he wasn't willing to accept just any solution. The sheriff thought for a moment. "Judge Hammond will be here next week for the circuit court. If you can provide evidence that the jewelry was rightfully yours, Miss Reynolds, he can dismiss the allegations officially." "The jewelry is gone," Tessa said helplessly. "I sold it months ago in Boston. How can I prove it was mine?" "Do you have your mother's will?" Thornton asked. "Or any documentation of the sale?" Tessa shook her head. "Mr. Hayward kept all my father's papers after he died. I have nothing." The sheriff looked sympathetic but troubled. "Without evidence, it's your word against Blackwood's and this Hayward fellow's. And given the amount they're claiming was stolen, it could be a serious charge." Thornton's jaw tightened. "This is absurd. You know Blackwood is doing this out of spite." "I do," the sheriff agreed quietly, "but the law has to be followed even when it's being manipulated." As they stood there, a commotion further up the street caught their attention. Oscar Blackwood was emerging from the Silver Spur, surrounded by several men including Mayor Jenkins. When he spotted Tessa and Thornton, he pointed dramatically. "There she is," he called loudly. "The thief who stole from me and my business associate." Thornton instinctively moved closer to Tessa as Blackwood and his entourage approached. The sheriff stepped forward, hands raised in a calming gesture. "That's enough, Blackwood," he said firmly. "We're handling this according to the law." "Are you?" Blackwood demanded. "Or are you giving special treatment to Mackenzie's woman? The whole town knows she's been living out at his ranch, proper boarding house or not. Maybe he's been harboring a criminal all along." A crowd was gathering now, including several parents of Tessa's students. She felt her face burning with humiliation at Blackwood's insinuations. "Miss Reynolds is a respected teacher," Thornton said, his voice level but with an edge of steel. "Your accusations are unfounded and malicious. If you continue to slander her character, you'll answer to me." The threat was clear in his tone, causing a murmur to run through the onlookers. Mayor Jenkins, a small man with a large mustache, puffed up his chest. "Are you threatening a prominent businessman, Mackenzie, in front of witnesses?" "I'm promising consequences for deliberate defamation," Thornton replied coldly. "And I'm not the only one who will stand up for Miss Reynolds." As if on cue, Reverend Collins pushed through the crowd to join them. "What's this about our schoolteacher being a thief? I don't believe a word of it." "Nor do I," added Mrs. Wilson, who had also arrived. "Miss Reynolds is a lady of impeccable character." Tessa felt a surge of gratitude as other townspeople began to voice their support. Parents whose children had thrived under her teaching, the mercantile owner who commented on her unfailing honesty, even the banker who noted her modest but responsible management of her salary. Blackwood's face darkened as he realized the tide of public opinion was turning against him. "The telegram from Boston," he began. "Could have been sent by anyone," the sheriff interrupted. "I'll need more than a telegram to take action against a citizen in good standing." Mayor Jenkins looked uncertain, glancing between Blackwood and the growing number of townspeople supporting Tessa. He clearly hadn't expected such resistance. "Perhaps we should wait for Judge Hammond," he suggested, trying to save face. "Let the law take its proper course." "A fine idea," the sheriff agreed quickly. "Until then, I see no reason to disrupt Miss Reynolds' teaching or her standing in the community." Blackwood wasn't ready to concede. "She's a thief and a liar," he snarled, "and Mackenzie is a fool for protecting her." Before anyone could react, Thornton stepped forward and grabbed Blackwood by the lapels of his expensive coat. Though Blackwood was heavier, Thornton was taller and had the strength of a man who worked his own land. "One more word against Miss Reynolds," Thornton said in a low voice that nonetheless carried to those nearby, "and you'll regret it for the rest of your days." The sheriff quickly moved to separate them. "That's enough. Both of you stand down." Thornton released Blackwood, who stumbled back, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. The saloon owner straightened his coat, glaring at Thornton. "This isn't over," he spat, then turned and pushed his way through the crowd, Mayor Jenkins hurrying after him. As the crowd dispersed, the sheriff turned to Tessa. "I'm sorry about that, Miss Reynolds. For what it's worth, I don't believe you're a thief, but we need to resolve this legally to put it to rest." "I understand," Tessa said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you for your fairness." The sheriff nodded, then headed back to his office. Reverend Collins approached, his kind face concerned. "The school board stands behind you, Miss Reynolds," he assured her. "We won't let these baseless accusations affect your position." "Thank you, Reverend," Tessa replied gratefully. "That means more than I can say." After the Reverend left, Mrs. Wilson insisted on walking Tessa back to the boarding house, declaring that she needed rest after such an ordeal. Thornton accompanied them, his expression still thunderous. At the boarding house steps, Mrs. Wilson tactfully went inside, leaving Tessa and Thornton a moment of privacy. "I'm sorry," Thornton said, his anger fading into concern. "I shouldn't have lost my temper like that. It only inflamed the situation." "No," Tessa disagreed. "You stood up for me when I needed it most." "I can never thank you enough for that." Thornton's expression softened. "We'll fight this, Tessa. I promise you Blackwood won't win." The use of her first name, spoken with such tenderness, made her heart skip. "I believe you," she said softly. For a moment they stood close, the autumn twilight gathering around them. Then Thornton stepped back, tipping his hat. "Rest now," he said. "I'll ride into Cheyenne tomorrow to speak with Judge Hammond directly. We'll clear your name." As Tessa watched him walk back to his wagon, she realized with sudden clarity that what she felt for Thornton McKenzie had grown far beyond gratitude. Somewhere between that desperate moment on the stagecoach and now, she had fallen in love with him. The revelation both thrilled and terrified her. After all she had been through, could she trust these feelings? And even if she could, did Thornton feel the same way? Thornton returned from Cheyenne 2 days later with promising news. Judge Hammond had agreed to hear the case as soon as he arrived in Silver Creek, and he had sent a telegram to Boston requesting verification of Henry Hayward's claims about the jewelry. "The judge knows Blackwood's reputation," Thornton explained as they walked through the town park after school. "He's not inclined to take his accusations at face value." "That's reassuring," Tessa said, though anxiety still gnawed at her, "but without evidence to disprove the claims, it will be difficult." "We have one advantage," Thornton replied. "The judge is willing to consider character witnesses. The Reverend, Mrs. Wilson, parents of your students all will testify to your honesty and integrity." They stopped near a small pond where ducks swam lazily in the afternoon sunlight. Tessa glanced around to ensure they weren't being observed, then spoke in a low voice. "There's something I haven't told you," she said, her hands twisting nervously in her skirts. "Something about my time in Boston after my father died." Thornton turned to face her, his expression open and non-judgmental. "You can tell me anything, Tessa." She took a deep breath. "Henry Hayward was my father's business partner, but he was also a suitor who had asked for my hand several times. My father always refused, saying Hayward was not the man he appeared to be. After father died, Hayward used his position as executor of the estate to pressure me into accepting his proposal." Thornton's eyes darkened with understanding. "The bruises you had when you arrived, they weren't all from Blackwood, were they?" Tessa shook her head. "Hayward has a terrible temper. When I continued to refuse him, he became violent. He threatened to have me committed to an asylum for hysteria if I didn't comply. Eventually, he arranged the marriage to Blackwood as a way to be rid of me while still profiting from the arrangement." "And the jewelry?" Thornton prompted gently. "It was my mother's a pearl necklace, a cameo brooch, and a pair of garnet earrings. Nothing extravagant, but they were precious to me. Hayward tried to claim they were part of my father's estate, but I knew they were mine by right. I took them before I left Boston and sold them to pay for essentials that Hayward refused to provide. Thornton's jaw tightened. He's using Blackwood to punish you for defying him. Yes, Tessa agreed, and for escaping. Men like Hayward and Blackwood can't bear to lose control. Judge Hammond should hear this story, Thornton said. It establishes Hayward's motive for making false accusations. Tessa nodded, though the thought of recounting her humiliation publicly made her stomach clench with anxiety. I'll tell him everything. I'm tired of living in fear of these men. Thornton reached out and gently took her hand. The touch was brief but comforting. You're the bravest person I know, Tessa Reynolds. The words warmed her heart, giving her courage for the battle ahead. Judge Hammond arrived in Silver Creek the following week. The courtroom normally, the town hall was packed with spectators eager to witness the proceedings. Tessa sat at the front beside Thornton, who had insisted on standing as her advocate. Oscar Blackwood arrived with Mayor Jenkins and his lawyer, Perkins. He carried a telegram which he presented to the judge with a flourish. Evidence from Boston, Your Honor, he announced loudly, confirming the theft of valuable jewelry by Miss Reynolds before she traveled west. Judge Hammond, a tall, austere man with a neatly trimmed white beard, read the telegram without expression, then looked at Tessa over his spectacles. Miss Reynolds, Mr. Blackwood and his associate in Boston, Mr. Henry Hayward, claim that you took jewelry valued at over $1,000 before leaving Boston. Do you deny this accusation? Tessa stood, her knees trembling slightly but her voice steady. I deny stealing anything, Your Honor. The jewelry I took from Boston was my mother's personal property, left to me in her will. I sold it to support myself after my father's death when Mr. Hayward, as executor of my father's estate, refused to provide adequate funds for my necessities. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge silenced it with a stern look. You have documentation of your mother's will or the sale of the jewelry, he asked. No, Your Honor, Tessa admitted. Mr. Hayward kept all family papers after my father's death. I have no access to them. Blackwood smirked triumphantly, but the judge wasn't finished. Miss Reynolds, would you tell the court why you left Boston and your arrangement with Mr. Blackwood? Tessa took a deep breath and recounted her story: her father's death, Hayward's unwanted advances and abuse, the coerced arrangement with Blackwood, and her desperate escape in Silver Creek. As she spoke, the courtroom grew absolutely silent, all eyes fixed on her. When I met Mr. Blackwood in Boston, she concluded, he showed me what kind of man he truly was. She gestured to her face, where the bruises had long since faded. The marks he left were still visible when I arrived here. I chose to flee rather than subject myself to a lifetime of abuse. Blackwood surged to his feet. She's lying. I never laid a hand on her in Boston. Sit down, Mr. Blackwood, the judge ordered sharply. You'll have your turn to speak. After Tessa's testimony, character witnesses rose one by one to speak on her behalf, Reverend Collins praising her dedication to her students, Mrs. Wilson attesting to her impeccable conduct at the boarding house, parents describing how their children had flourished under her teaching. When it was Blackwood's turn, he repeated his accusations but provided no evidence beyond the telegram. When the judge questioned him closely about his meeting with Tessa in Boston, he became evasive and contradictory. Your Honor, Thornton said when Blackwood had finished, I have something to add that may be relevant. The judge nodded for him to proceed. When Miss Reynolds first arrived in Silver Creek, Mr. Blackwood claimed she had cost him $500. Yet when I paid him to nullify their contract, he could only produce receipts totaling $375. Thornton produced the signed agreement. This suggests a pattern of exaggeration and deception regarding financial matters. Judge Hammond examined the document, then looked at Blackwood with narrowed eyes. Is this your signature, Mr. Blackwood? It is, Blackwood admitted grudgingly. But that has nothing to do with the theft. On the contrary, the judge replied. It speaks to your credibility, which is central to this case. After a brief recess, during which the judge reviewed all the evidence, the court reconvened for his ruling. This is a case of accusation without substantiation, Judge Hammond declared. Mr. Blackwood has provided no proof beyond a telegram from an interested party who is not present to be questioned. Against this, we have the testimony of numerous respected citizens regarding Miss Reynolds' character and conduct. He turned to face Tessa directly. Miss Reynolds, this court finds no cause to believe you have committed theft or any other crime. You are free to continue your life and profession without this cloud hanging over you. Relief washed over Tessa in a dizzying wave. Beside her, Thornton squeezed her hand in quiet celebration. But Judge Hammond wasn't finished. He turned to Blackwood, his expression stern. Mr. Blackwood, this court takes a dim view of unfounded accusations that damage a person's reputation. Should you continue to spread these claims, you may find yourself facing charges of slander. Am I understood? Blackwood's face flushed dark with anger and humiliation. Yes, Your Honor, he muttered. Furthermore, the judge continued, I will be sending a report to the territorial governor regarding your conduct in this matter. The abuse of legal processes for personal vendettas is not something I will tolerate in my jurisdiction. As the court adjourned, townspeople crowded around Tessa to offer congratulations and support. Thornton stood slightly apart, watching with a small smile as she received the community's affirmation. Blackwood pushed through the crowd, stopping directly in front of Tessa. His voice was low, meant only for her ears. You've won this round, he hissed, but you'll never be safe here. I'll make sure of that. Before Tessa could respond, Thornton appeared beside her, his hand coming to rest protectively at the small of her back. It's over, Blackwood, he said quietly. Walk away while you still can. Something in Thornton's expression must have convinced Blackwood that further threats would be unwise. With a final glare, he turned and stalked out of the town hall, Mayor Jenkins hurrying after him. Later that evening, Thornton invited Tessa to dinner at the hotel restaurant to celebrate her vindication. It was the first time they had dined together publicly in town, and Tessa was acutely aware of the curious glances from other patrons. Does it bother you? Thornton asked, noticing her discomfort. The attention, a little, she admitted. Though after today I suppose I should be accustomed to being the center of town gossip. They'll find something new to talk about soon enough, Thornton assured her. Small towns always do. They enjoyed a pleasant meal, carefully avoiding the topic of Blackwood and the trial. Instead, they discussed Tessa's students, Thornton's plans for winter preparations at the ranch, and books they had both read. As they finished dessert, apple pie that wasn't nearly as good as Mrs. Flores, they agreed. Thornton grew more serious. Tessa, he said, his voice lower and more intimate. There's something I've been wanting to say to you, but the timing never seemed right. Tessa's heart began to beat faster. What is it? Thornton hesitated, then reached across the table to take her hand. These past months, getting to know you, watching you build a new life despite everything you've been through, it's been a privilege. You're the strongest, most determined woman I've ever met. Tessa felt a blush warming her cheeks. Thornton, please, let me finish, he said gently. I know your experiences with men have given you every reason to be cautious, and I would never want to rush you or make you uncomfortable, but I care for you, Tessa, deeply. More than I thought I could care for anyone after Sarah died. The admission hung in the air between them, momentous and fragile. Tessa stared at their joined hands, emotions swirling through her. You don't have to say anything now, Thornton continued. I just wanted you to know how I feel. Whatever happens next is entirely up to you. Tessa looked up at him, this man who had saved her in more ways than one, who had shown her what real strength and gentleness looked like in combination. The answer was simple, and yet the words stuck in her throat. I care for you too, she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. So much that it frightens me sometimes. Thornton's eyes softened. I would never hurt you, Tessa. That's a promise I can make without reservation. "I know," she said, and realized she truly did know it deep in her bones. "But after everything with Hayward and Blackwood, I'm still learning to trust my own judgment again." "I understand," Thornton said, squeezing her hand gently. "We have time. There's no rush." As they left the restaurant and Thornton walked her back to the boarding house, Tessa felt lighter than she had in months. The evening air was crisp with approaching winter, stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. At the boarding house steps, they paused. "Mrs. Wilson was undoubtedly watching from the window, but Tessa found she didn't care. "Thank you," she said, "for everything you've done, for believing in me when no one else did." "I'll always believe in you," Thornton replied simply. Before she could overthink it, Tessa stood on tiptoe and pressed a brief, soft kiss to his cheek. His beard was softer than she'd imagined against her lips. "Good night, Thornton," she whispered. His eyes, when she stepped back, held a warmth that wrapped around her heart. "Good night, Tessa." The weeks that followed were the happiest Tessa had known in years. She threw herself into her teaching, developing new methods to engage her students and organizing a Christmas pageant that the entire town attended. Thornton came to town more frequently, sometimes for legitimate business, but often just to walk with her after school or share a meal at the hotel restaurant. Their courtship was conducted with proper decorum, Mrs. Wilson made certain of that, but the growing affection between them was obvious to everyone. Sometimes, Tessa caught herself daydreaming in the middle of arithmetic lessons, remembering the feel of Thornton's hand holding hers or the sound of his rare but wonderful laugh. Oscar Blackwood remained in Silver Creek, but he had become noticeably subdued after the judge's ruling. He avoided Tessa when they happened to be on the same street, and the threatening observations ceased entirely. Whether this was due to the judge's warning or Thornton's steady presence in town, Tessa wasn't certain, but she was grateful for the respite. As Christmas approached, Silver Creek was transformed by festive decorations and an unusual spirit of goodwill. The schoolhouse became the center of holiday preparations, with Tessa and her students creating paper chains, pine cone ornaments, and hand-painted cards for family members. On the last day of school before the Christmas break, Thornton arrived with his wagon just as the children were being dismissed. He helped Tessa carry the students' gifts and her own belongings out to the wagon. "I have a surprise for you," he said as they loaded the last box. "If you're willing to trust me." Tessa smiled up at him. "Of course I trust you. What is it? You'll see," he replied mysteriously, helping her up to the seat beside him. Instead of driving toward the boarding house, Thornton headed out of town in the direction of his ranch. The afternoon was clear but cold, the winter sun casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. "Where are we going?" Tessa asked, curious but not anxious. Being with Thornton always made her feel safe. "Patience," he advised with a small smile. "It's not far." About a mile outside of town, Thornton turned onto a smaller track that Tessa hadn't noticed before. They followed it through a stand of pines until they came to a clearing where a small cabin stood, smoke rising from its chimney. "What is this place?" Tessa asked as Thornton brought the wagon to a stop. "It's the old Miller homestead," he explained. "Jake Miller and his wife lived here until they moved to Oregon last spring. It's been sitting empty since then." He helped her down from the wagon and led her toward the cabin. When he opened the door, Tessa gasped in surprise. The interior had been completely transformed. Fresh pine boughs decorated the mantel over a crackling fire. Candles in simple holders cast a warm glow over the clean, modestly furnished room. A small table was set for two, with a bouquet of winter berries and evergreens as a centerpiece. "Thornton, it's beautiful," Tessa breathed, taking in the scene. "Did you do all this?" "Mrs. Flores helped," he admitted. "But I wanted to give you a Christmas surprise, a peaceful dinner away from prying eyes and town gossip." Tessa was deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "It's perfect." As they enjoyed the meal, Mrs. Flores had prepared roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread. Tessa felt a sense of contentment she had never expected to find after the turmoil of the past year. "I have something else to show you," Thornton said as they finished eating. He led her to a small side room that had been set up as a study, with bookshelves lining one wall and a simple desk beneath a window. "This could be your classroom," he explained, "for private lessons during the summer or for children from outlying homesteads who can't make it to town regularly." Tessa looked around the room, envisioning it filled with books and eager young minds. "It's wonderful. But I don't understand, why are you showing me this?" Thornton took a deep breath, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Because I'm hoping you might consider making this place your home." Tessa's eyes widened as she realized what he was suggesting. "Thornton," he took her hands in his. "I know it's soon, and if you need more time, I understand. But I love you, Tessa. I want to build a life with you here if you like this place or anywhere else you choose." Tears welled in Tessa's eyes. "You love me." "With all my heart," he replied simply. "I think I began to love you that first day on the stagecoach when you looked at me with such courage even in your fear." Tessa stepped closer to him, her heart overflowing. "I love you too, Thornton. I've been afraid to say it, afraid to trust it, but it's been true for so long now." Thornton's face lit with joy. He cupped her face gently in his hands. "Will you marry me, Tessa? Will you make a home with me?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." His kiss was gentle at first, a question she answered by moving closer, her hands resting on his chest. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "The cabin is part of my property," Thornton explained. "I've been fixing it up for months, hoping you might agree to live here one day. It's close enough to town for your teaching, but far enough for privacy." "It's perfect," Tessa said, looking around the cozy rooms with new eyes, seeing them as her future home. "When can we be married?" "As soon as you wish," Thornton replied. "Though Mrs. Wilson might have opinions about proper waiting periods and announcements." Tessa laughed. "Let's ask Reverend Collins to marry us on New Year's Day, a new beginning for a new year." "I like that idea," Thornton agreed, pulling her close again. "A new beginning together." New Year's Day dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue over Silver Creek. The small church was filled with townspeople who had come to witness the marriage of their schoolteacher to the respected rancher who had championed her cause. Tessa wore a new dress of deep blue silk that Mrs. Flores had helped her make, with a lace collar that had belonged to Thornton's mother. As she walked down the aisle toward Thornton, who waited by the altar looking handsome and slightly stunned in his best suit, she felt none of the fear or doubt that had plagued her previous engagement. This was right. This was where she belonged. Reverend Collins performed a simple but heartfelt ceremony. When Thornton slipped a gold band onto Tessa's finger and promised to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life, his voice was steady and sure. When Tessa made the same vows in return, she spoke clearly without reservation. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Collins declared. "Mr. McKenzie, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was brief but tender, mindful of their audience yet conveying the depth of their feelings. When they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Thornton McKenzie, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration continued at the town hall, where the women of Silver Creek had prepared a wedding feast. Even Sheriff Williams had contributed a barrel of cider from his own orchard. The only notable absence was Oscar Blackwood, who had left town shortly after Christmas, reportedly to visit associates in Denver. As Tessa and Thornton accepted congratulations and good wishes from the townspeople, she marveled at how completely her life had changed since that desperate day on the stagecoach. The frightened, bruised woman who had whispered please to a stranger was gone, replaced by someone stronger, happier, and deeply loved. Later, as they drove toward their new home in the cabin Thornton had prepared so lovingly, Tessa leaned against her husband's shoulder. "Are you happy, Mrs. McKenzie?" he asked, his arm secure around her. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied truthfully. "And you? "I thought my chance for this kind of happiness had died with Sarah," Thornton admitted, "but you proved me wrong. You gave me a new beginning when I didn't even know I needed one." They shared a smile that contained all the promise of their future together, a future built on trust, respect, and love freely given and gratefully received. As twilight gathered around their little cabin in the Wyoming wilderness, Tessa Reynolds McKenzie knew with absolute certainty that she had found her home at last, not just in this place, but in the heart of the man who had asked her to come with him when she needed it most. 5 years later, the Double M Ranch had prospered and grown. The small cabin where Tessa and Thornton had begun their married life was now used as a schoolhouse during summer months, when Tessa taught children from outlying homesteads. They had built a larger home near Thornton's original ranch house, which now served as guest quarters for the occasional visitor. On a warm June evening, Tessa sat on the porch swing, watching Thornton play with their 3-year-old daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, named for both Thornton's first wife and Tessa's mother. The child's delighted squeals filled the air as her father swung her high, her dark hair so like Tessa's own flying in the breeze. Beside Tessa in a cradle, their 6-month-old son, James Henry, slept peacefully, his tiny fist curled against his cheek. He had Thornton's eyes and determined chin, already showing signs of his father's steady temperament. Cal approached from the barn, touching his hat respectfully. Though he remained Thornton's foreman, he had become more like family over the years, especially after marrying Jenny Wilson, Mrs. Wilson's niece, 2 summers ago. "Mail came, Mrs. McKenzie," he said, handing Tessa a small bundle of letters, including one from Boston. "Looks like." "Thank you, Cal," Tessa replied with a smile. "Will you and Jenny join us for supper? Mrs. Flores made enough to feed an army as usual." "Wouldn't miss it," Cal assured her before heading toward the bunkhouse, which had been expanded to accommodate the additional hands needed for the growing ranch operations. Tessa sorted through the mail, a letter from the school board confirming her continued position for the fall term, a catalog from a Denver mercantile, and a thick envelope bearing a Boston postmark. She opened the latter with curiosity. Inside was a formal legal document and a brief letter from a law firm she didn't recognize. "Dear Mrs. McKenzie, we regret to inform you of the passing of Mr. Henry Hayward last month. As per the enclosed court decree, certain items of personal property that were determined to rightfully belong to you are being returned to your possession. Mr. Hayward's questionable management of your father's estate was discovered during an unrelated investigation, leading to this legal remedy. Please find enclosed documentation of your mother's will and several financial instruments that should have been distributed to you as your inheritance. The court has appointed our firm to ensure these assets are properly transferred to you without delay. Respectfully yours, Harrington and Sons, attorneys at law." Tessa stared at the papers in disbelief. After all these years, justice had finally caught up with Henry Hayward. The inheritance he had denied her, while not a fortune, would provide additional security for her children and allow her to establish the scholarship for promising students that she and Thornton had often discussed. Good news. Thornton asked, coming up the porch steps with Sarah perched on his shoulders. At 37, he was still strong and vital, though silver now threaded liberally through his light brown hair and beard. "Unexpected news," Tessa replied, handing him the letter. "It seems the past has finally been put to rest." Thornton read the letter, then whistled softly. "Well, I'll be, after all this time." "It doesn't matter much now," Tessa said, smiling as Sarah climbed down from her father's shoulders and snuggled into her mother's side. "We've built our life without it." "True," Thornton agreed, settling beside her on the swing and putting his arm around her shoulders. "But it's fitting that your father's wishes are finally being honored and that Hayward's deception has been exposed." Tessa leaned into her husband's embrace, thinking about the long journey that had brought her to this moment of contentment. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't been on that particular stagecoach? if you hadn't decided to return from Cheyenne early that day. Thornton considered the question, his hand gently stroking her arm. I believe some things are meant to be, Tessa. We might have taken different paths, but I think we would have found each other somehow. Such a romantic, she teased, though the idea warmed her heart. Only with you, he replied, dropping a kiss on the top of her head. As the sun began to set over the Wyoming prairie, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Tessa surveyed her domain, the thriving ranch, the healthy children, the good man beside her. She thought of the frightened young woman she had been, whispering pleas to a stranger on a stagecoach, and marveled at how far she had come. I love you, Thornton McKenzie, she said softly. Thank you for asking me to come with you that day. Best decision I ever made, he replied, his voice rich with emotion. I love you too, Tessa McKenzie, more with each passing day. Their lips met in a tender kiss filled with the quiet certainty of enduring love. Around them, the ranch settled into evening rhythms, cattle lowing in distant pastures, ranch hands laughing in the bunkhouse, their children's steady breathing. This was the life they had built together, a testament to courage, second chances, and the healing power of love freely given. In that moment, under the vast Wyoming sky, Tessa knew a happiness so complete it almost hurt, the kind of happiness that can only come after struggle, the joy that is all the sweeter for having known sorrow. The road from that desperate whisper on the stagecoach to this peaceful evening had not been easy, but every step had led her home, and home, she had learned, was not a place at all, but the sanctuary found in loving and being loved in return.